You're on.
Well, movements begin in caves and end in cathedrals. I spent a lot of time on this particular chapter. It's something that I've heard and learned decades ago, and Richard Rogers is the first person that told me this. Here's a quote by Abhijit Naskar. No organization can stay uncorrupt for long, be it a political party, a religious institution, or a charity foundation. Sooner or later, the instinctual evils of greed and cruelty overwhelm the organization, fueled by its authoritative control over people. It's a powerful quote. And when I think of movements beginning in caves, so exciting, so electric, so organic, and then over time they end in cathedrals, the perfect example for this in the United States is the Reverend Robert Schuller, who many people have heard around the world. He started his ministry at a drive-in movie lot in 1955. On that first Sunday, he always talked about people drove in. Did they have drive-in movies in England? Was there a time that all the cars would pull into the lot and listen to the speakers?
We don't have good no. I think they might have tried it to imitate the Americans,
Yeah.
but if it was an anachronism. There was maybe like
Okay.
one or two. It's
So
definitely
that
not
was a big
successful.
thing here, in the 50s. And people stayed in their cars, and Reverend Schuller stood atop the refreshment stand and preached. And he rented that lot for $10 on Sundays. His first contribution was $86.79. That's a movement. And it grew and it grew and people loved it. It was not even pretentious. It was we're not trying to impress people with our fancy stained glass. And it grew. And then in the 1980s, he built the Crystal Cathedral at a price today of $51 million. Years later, he resigned, had massive conflict with his children. He tried his daughter and his son to take over the church. He wanted to retire. Neither one worked. They all got upset with each other. The family had the whole foundation went bankrupt, and the cathedral was sold to the Catholics. Movements begin in caves and end in cathedrals. Our church in London, when I went there, Boston was already achieving cathedral status. It's one of the reasons Doug and I wanted out. We long for the simple days of church growth, of organic, of this just works because it's right. And it's interesting that Doug Arthur has told me in the last couple of months the most fun he ever had in the ministry in his life were the early days in London. I'll have to say, I'm in agreement. It was either that, and it's tied with my days in Boston when I was working at Northeastern University. Those are the two times that I loved the church the most. And Nadine talks about the early days in London. Now, some of those things that she mentions are right. They struck me in fact, some of our friends actually contacted me and said, "Is this true? Were things that loose in the early days in London?" Yeah, they were. Listen, let me just be honest about something. We wanted to get away from Kip. We already knew Kip was not the kind of leader we wanted to be, and that was not how we wanted to run our church. And even when discipleship really hit hard, we were already in London when it was told that we need to talk about our disciples and our disciplers. And it's just weird. It's just weird. I would go back to Boston to speak, and I'd have some woman come to me I don't know and go, "I want to introduce you to my three disciples. Come on, ladies, my three disciples." They're falling behind her. It just seemed weird. And Doug said, "Let's don't do that." But after a couple of years, we felt enormous pressure to fall in line. There were no first principle studies in London in the early days. We didn't even have guard the gospel then. We studied what we thought people needed to get baptized. It was probably a lot more like New Testament, right? No one told the Ethiopian guy, dude, you got 10 studies. I don't know. Yeah, we're going to be here. Get a room. We're going to be here for 2 weeks. No. And I love the fact that Nadine mentioned she had a boyfriend in France that we didn't even tell her, you got to break up with him. She decided that later herself. And by the way, it was dealt with so much better because she decided to do it herself as opposed to being made to. Even who to study with, the early days. Oh, in the cave. Loved it. Study with anybody. Anybody that's open, you study with. I've often said, our first convert, I think, in the church was somebody Tanya met, 98-year-old Jewish man, Daniel Toledano. We were thrilled when he got baptized. We were thrilled to pick him up for every single session and help walk him in. After that, Roland. I met Roland, Rastafarian. I mean, we were trying to start a church in London, and we didn't have the English people running to join, and we didn't care. Anybody that had a soul that wanted to study, we were doing that. Later, our church evolved when it was closer to being a cathedral to having an evangelist standing up during one of our big reach out hope blitzes. No more Nigerians. No more Nigerians as visitors. That wasn't a private. That was to everybody, including the Americans that were visiting. No more Nigerians. They will come to anything. We're getting too many Nigerians in our church. Wonder how your wife feels about that, being Nigerian. I mean, that to me is when you're getting to cathedral status now, and you're deciding who you want to admit into your group and who you don't. Because we want to have an English church. We want it to look as if it's English. Well, shouldn't have had 3 Americans leading it then. Because that made it kind of tough to be British. Here's another great example of this. Do you ever remember the ministry of the high C punch cans?
Say that again. The what?
The high C punch cans.
I can't even understand what you're saying, James. The
Okay,
high sea, like as in the ocean. The high sea.
high C.
What's the
Yes.
next bit you're
Anyway,
saying?
yes. It's
Punch cans.
all of a sudden I'm flashing back down preaching in London, and you're Nadine Templar and can't understand half the words I'm saying.
Because what I
Because
heard was high sea punch cans.
that's it.
I don't know what
So
that is. No, I
high
don't know what that is.
C is a type of beverage that used to be very popular here. It'd come in the big old tins, right? And this came from the Church of Christ. It came from Parker Henderson. They used to do this so that everybody could be involved in giving for missions. Every family would have a can at home to put all their change in every day at the end of a day. And and we decorated the cans. We had one for Nigeria. We had one for Singapore. We had one for all these places. And it really was cool because families got involved, and they would put pictures of those places on the cans. And you would hear the clink, clink, clink. You would hear that as the children would come in and add to it. And then, of course, on one day, everybody would bring their cans to the big service and walk up and put them there. That's about as beautiful and organic and involved the family. And so it was beautiful. That was beginning in caves. Now, by the end, what we found out is they took those cans and dumped them all in a big bucket and said, now we got money for whatever we need. It had nothing to do with Nigeria. That money could have gone to Singapore because we're doing Singapore this year. All those people that were learning the Yoruba language and all the people that were so excited about the leaders on the cans that are going to be going to Nigeria, that was a farce. We wanted the money, and people gave more money that way. But we were dumping those cans into not just missions. Maybe we've got a big thing planned coming up that we need to fly all the speakers in. We got the can, we got the money from the punch can. Now, when that was complained about to Albert, he admitted it, he acknowledged it, and said, "We're not going to do that again." So I've got to mention that one part. But it's an example of a movement that begins in a cave. It's so organic, it's so real, it's so natural. But then it becomes so legalistic. I've seen this happen so many times in our, here's a good example, music. Remember the first service you ever came to and how nice the music sounded? I mean, you listen to this group of Christians that are singing these songs, and initially it's a cappella, but everybody's singing their hearts out, and they're even singing different parts, and it's beautiful. It's worshipful. Visitors noticed. But then we began to evolve. Let's start evolving. Let's get out of this cave. And then we start learning new songs. And I don't have a problem with this. And we start practicing parts. We're meeting on Wednesday to learn new songs. We're going to learn 4 new songs. Come on, Malcolm. Come on, Steve. So that we'll sound even better. Nothing wrong with that. And then we go to instruments. We go to choirs. Hey, this sounds even better. We got the people, only the people that can sing well are singing now. The other people can sit back and enjoy it. And here's where Cathedral happens. At a church that I don't need to mention, there was a really talented sister, the best singer among the women. Beautiful voice in that choir up front. But she's not doing the solo today. In fact, she's been moved to the back row because she's gained weight. So the leader makes the decision, we can't have her in the front singing the solo with her weight. That's a horrible testimony. Put her in the back row. And now you got a cathedral. That's how it grows. That's how it changes. Now, this is where it gets interesting for me. By the way, I talked to Steve Johnson yesterday. He asked me, how many of those lessons have you done now? How many of the confessions of an ungodly cult leader? How many sessions? I said, about 20. He said, what things have you learned? Have there been any insights? And I said, yeah. And one of them was, I may not have been deprogrammed. It may not have been a sinister operation. It may have been a good-hearted, James is an honest guy. He'll give us the right answers. And I was honest enough that when I heard the things that I knew were atrocious, I accepted it. I accepted it. I didn't make excuses for it. And it left me in no other place except, I don't want to be in here in this group. I can see. So that was one thing. But here's another. I have said since we started these recordings that we started out great in our church. But over time, we became the cathedral. But we started out pure. And when I hear Nadine say stuff like the early days in London were so much more pure, that resonates with me. I like hearing it. But after doing all this, I'm at a point where I can't say that now. I'm just no longer sure. I think one thing I've done since I started all this is focused on learning, unlearning, and relearning. And I just wish everybody could have that attitude when you hear these things. Don't let them run through the filters that you've established over years. You got to unlearn some stuff. And I've realized maybe we were not so pure at the beginning. Maybe it started out this impure. Maybe even in the earliest days, we were off track. I'm not saying I'm 100% there. But when Nadine shared about the horrible things that she observed in London in the early days, that hit me hard. Like those were embarrassing things that she observed. Come over, take care of the house, clean. My kid's crying, help. I got to get up in 2 hours, Doug, and go to my job. That's okay. Well, you're going to lay in bed and sleep all day with your wife. That's right. But let's go. Help me out. I mean, that was her experience. And I just, I can't even get over the line up, ladies, line up. Let me see you. Okay, let's go. Turn around. Come on. Turn around. Let me check. You need to lose 7 pounds, sister. I'm going to say only 5. That to me is so atrocious. I can't even get beyond that. You want your daughter? Want your granddaughter in it? Is this what we're saying? So maybe we had our problems even from the earlier days. More and more people are sharing their trauma from the early days. And I can't ignore it. And I'm going to tell you what I will never do. I will never say, oh, you say it was like a cult. It wasn't like that. It wasn't that bad. No. Back then, it wasn't as bad. It got bad later. I'll never say that to those people. Who would we be? I think we were off a fair bit. And one of the things that really hit me hard, I know I called you up. Some woman moved to Lexington and was the 6th baptism in the Lexington church. We were not the Boston church. Now, she got out after 3 or 4 months, but she was baptized and told to get rebaptized, and she just came from Crossroads Church. Told she needed to get rebaptized, which she did. This is the early days. This is, we had 36. Forget the 30 would-bes. She was in the picture with 36 would-bes, okay? She was right there. And she said she felt the pressure. She felt controlled. And she came up from Fort Lauderdale, she mentioned. She was going to nursing school, was told she needed to spend more time on the campus, evangelizing, leading 2 Bible talks. She got out and never looked back. That tells me that we weren't so perfect even in the earliest days. So I think it got much worse. Movements begin in caves and end in cathedrals. What do you have to add to that, Matthew?
I'm gonna I never experienced it as a cave. So when I joined in when I got baptized in 1988, it was a cathedral. There was Boston was very
Interesting.
established. London was about 1,000 people probably at that.
Huh?
I don't know, maybe 800. I don't know. Um, we had set time evangelism. We had this series of Bible studies. We had Guard the Gospel. We had dating, how dating worked. We had conferences. We had, it was very established. It was an institution. So that was my experience of it. So the only time I probably experienced closer to the cave thing was in Jerusalem when there were only 12 of us. But even then, we were just a satellite of a much bigger thing. And we'd all been trained and taught in the much bigger thing. So even though things were kind of looser because it was much smaller, the influence of sort of the Roman Empire, as it were, the influence of the capital city of Babylon or whatever you want to call it, or the central leadership would come upon us, and we were obviously influenced by that. And I remember even coming back and my mum saying, "How did you end up in a smaller church and you've become more committed?" Because I was sort of more ICOC when I came back. So that was my experience personally, but for me, it relates back to this honesty issue because so I think the seeds, the impure seeds, just in the doctrine alone, let alone the hearts of the people. So leave that to one. Let's say everybody was really pure-hearted. Uh, Kip everybody. And they've got this doctrine where you have to come to every meeting. You have to be super committed. This is it, the doctrine is so like it would be impossible to have that doctrine with complete honesty and problems not occur, because the doctrine itself is not love. The doctrine is a very legalistic, controlling, uh, um, self-righteous, mechanical doctrine. It's a
Sure.
mechanical understanding of Jesus and the Bible, and so with that, and so if there was complete honesty at the beginning and complete integrity, I think that there would have been a greater clash where you all went, hold on, this isn't this girl, our sixth baptism, she feels like we're a cult. Let's talk to her. Well, why do you feel like we're a cult? Well, what kind of things? But we all meet together. Yeah, but I don't want to feel forced to meet together. You can meet together. I want to go and see an R-rated movie. No, but that causes me to struggle. But it doesn't cause me to. There would have been like a discussion and a debate, and you might have ended up disagreeing. You could never have had the same sort of unity of purpose because it was more like an army where you obey orders. So I think the impurity, the only reason that it was felt better was because it was still more relationship based, because it was small.
Yes.
It was still more relationship. There was more freedom. There was more genuine love. But that doctrine stuff was just waiting to take over, and that power stuff, and the reason why that doctrine stuff wasn't being challenged, that impurity was also there. That sense of, well, if we talk about this stuff, then we might not ever get off the ground, which is faithless because it's not really trusting God. And it's so there's all sorts of things that if you lack integrity, you don't identify because you'll just squash them down for the benefits of the mission. And I recognize that myself with putting these together with Facebook, even on a small scale. I recognize my desire to expose the ICOC, to bring love to the world, to challenge traditional Christianity. That can become more important to me than
Mm,
just loving my friends and
sure.
having relationships. And that's, for me, that is the spiritual challenge. Is for me, the only solution to all of that is the only way you'll ever have a religious institution, a religious movement, any kind of movement that doesn't end up in a power dynamic, in a corrupt power dynamic, is if each individual person makes love the priority. And that is very, very challenging.
And how many studies did we have in the Guard the Gospel
On love.
to teach people how to love?
Well, love is obeying basically they interpret it, to be fair to them. You could say all of them, because if you love me, you will obey my commands. So that is what love is. Love is obeying the commands. So therefore, if we come to every meeting, read our Bibles, obey our leaders, that all that together equals love. And that is not just, to be fair, the ICOC understanding. That is a lot of Christianity's understanding of what love
A lot
is.
of clanging cymbals.
Unfortunately, that's and 1 Corinthians 13 was the verse that opened my mind to that. It was like, oh, hold on.
We
We
use that verse almost exclusively for weddings.
yeah.
We didn't use it. We didn't use it to preach to us about what love is.
I would make that a foundational guard the gospel verse.
Yeah,
I would make that a guard the gospel verse. Like
yeah.
you can reach out to 1,000 people, you can baptize the whole world, you can have the biggest church ever, but if you have not love, you've got nothing.
I'm with you.
That's so.
Before,
So I
before,
think the cave thing, what you experienced in the cave, was just the love, and as the cathedral took over, the love got taken. So I think the love was there more in the early days, and freedom. I think the love and the freedom was there
I
more.
think it was too.
Yeah.
And before we leave this topic, I wanted to say that something else has approached me, and
Mm.
I've shared it with some friends regarding this. Is when you're trying to figure out when was love starting to subside and when was legalism making an entry, and how did we go from this beautiful cave to this ugly cathedral? And there's a part, this was revealed to me while I was studying it. I think I changed over time. Maybe when we say, oh, in the early days it was pure. It was just pure. But in the later days it got really legalistic. Might not be talking about the church as much as ourselves. When I look at myself as a young Christian, and I look at myself in London after being there for a number of years, I had changed. I had fed more into the system and less on love. I just realized that. I mean, right?
James,
I
I
mean,
can
hey,
tell
so
you,
I baptized somebody the second week I'm in London. I'm rejoicing and it's exciting. And I'm thanking God day after day for it. And then by the time we get to a church of 200, remember in the baptistry, a young woman just got baptized, and I have a young brother doing the prayer. Thank you, God, for number 97 and number 98 tonight. And I'm going, that is the most insensitive number, legalistic comment. And I'm looking at the guy, he's been a Christian for 6 months. Where did he learn that? The guy's only been in Christ for 6 months. Where did he learn that we're counting numbers more than people's names? From me. From me. And so I think I changed. I think my heart was better at the beginning than it was at the end. I think my heart went from a cave to a cathedral. And
well,
I think that may be the case with a lot of us.
I think that was the case with me.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, I, when I first evangelized, I was happy. I enjoyed it. I mean, even going back, I was met in a mental hospital by probably an evangelical guy, and I prayed Jesus into my heart. There was a woman next to me who was had worked as a prostitute. I remember encouraging her to pray, and she prayed, and then this thing worked out, and she was so happy. And it would like her brother had come from Ireland to rescue her, and it was like God had answered the prayer. And then I met the Church of Christ, and then I started evangelizing, and it felt very much like God, and it was powerful. And then as time went on, I'd give myself the first year, I'd give myself grace for the first year in that I had incredible moments of closeness to God. But then after that, things happened. And then for me, it absolutely was legalism. And my dishonesty is ultimately with myself, not going, look, this isn't working. And I think my dishonesty was born of fear. I mean, the other problem I have was the leadership dishonesty. So obviously what I saw was, well, it's working for the leadership.
Right.
So the problem must be you. So I have to pin that. I have to pin that aspect on the leadership because they weren't honest with me when I was being honest with them. Because I was telling them it's not working for me. And the feedback I was getting was, do this, do that. You're not doing this enough. You're not doing that enough. You haven't thought, it's like when in reality it wasn't really working for them either. So that's a problem. But my lack of honesty with myself to really go, this isn't working, there's something wrong, I don't really believe this, or I don't trust that. And so I definitely, and as years went on, I absolutely became a legalist, you know, a very bad legalist, but a legalist. And yeah, so I think it's inevitable, James, because what we were being taught was legalism. So I don't know. I think the problem. I think you do have to look at the doctrine. I don't think you can separate out the doctrine because the
Yeah.
doctrine is a doctrine of legalism. It is like do this, do this, do this, do this.
And you will make it. Otherwise,
Yeah,
you're going to join the 99.99% of the world that's all going to burn in hell forever.
and also there's that thing of like if well I don't want to do that. Well then do it, but get your heart in it.
Right.
Which is again we used to do that. It's like well the problem isn't that we definitely have got to do the doing. The doing is ironclad. Then it's just a question of getting it. And the problem is your heart. The problem is your heart. Whereas if we just said, okay, the doing should come out of the joy and love. It shouldn't be, the doing should be a natural, it shouldn't even take thought or effort. It's just a natural product of what's going on in your heart. So forget the doing. Let's work out why aren't we feeling the joy? Let's just focus on that for 20 years. Let's just work out. But obviously doing that you're not going to you're going to have five people in a room talking for 20 years. And that goes against the productive mindset of we've got to do it because so there is a thing in humanity where we don't want to introspect and question because like, we've got to do it. Whereas maybe there's a case for like, unless we work out what the foundation is that we're actually building on, whatever we build is going to turn into a cathedral that's going to collapse.
Right. By the way, before I leave the topic, I got to
Yeah.
say it's interesting, and I don't even know the rhyme or reason to this, but one of the most spiritual moments I've had in my life was when I was in London leading the South, and we all took off the South Zone, took some buses, went down to your neck of the woods in Margate, went into the caves at Margate. I paid them to not let anyone else in while we were there. We had 1 hour. And we had a pretty good sized group. And we went inside those caves and we had them dim the lights. And the sound was gorgeous because it was in a cave. And Daniel Ing just led us in an hour of singing our songs. And it was so moving. I still remember it. My wife still remembers it. It was so moving. We were away from the big service. We were away from Regent Street. We were away from, let me count how many came today. Let me count. And we were in a cave singing, and I'll never forget it. And others have told me the same. So all we can do, no matter where you are in life today with church or religion or any organization, be mindful. Be mindful that it may well start out in a cave and end in a cathedral, and be aware of that.